everyone, welcome to this portion of the stream. My name is Lander Alpha. We're going to be talking about the current state of accessibility in Pokemon Go with my friend, none other than the wonderful James Rath. Now, let me introduce you guys a little bit about him, then we're going to talk with him about himself and how he works in accessibility with his own disability. We're going to be talking about that, and we're going to tie this all in to Pokemon Go, especially the current state of Pokemon Go and how everyone's been feeling about Incense and other changes that Niantic has made in the game to basically force people back outside. So real quick, I'm going to read his introduction, and then we're going to talk with James real quick. So, James Rath is a legally blind content creator, filmmaker, and accessibility consultant within tech and gaming. He was the first independent YouTuber to have a sit-down interview with Apple CEO Tim Cook. His videos documenting his journey with blindness, sharing accessible experiences and consumer products have reached over 6 million views and over 75,000 followers across his social platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for James Rath. James, how are you doing today?
Doing well. It's I'm enjoying the weather finally, right? It's like not winter-ish, but I keep jinxing it because we keep getting these winter storms on the East Coast like literally every weekend. For the last month.
The weather just won't make up its mind. For you guys to understand real quick, we live in the Northeast for context here, and we deal with the same crappy weather every year. And March, when it comes time for spring, it's like, are we gonna have spring? No, more snow. Okay. Oh, warms up again. Oh wait, more snow. We had this song and dance that just won't end. We won't have a true spring, but it is what it is. So, James, so one thing I want to talk about really quick while we're getting into this is not our first time doing something like this.
No. Yeah, that's what feels so nostalgic about this in a way. Man, it's been well over a decade though.
Yeah, yes.
The wild part.
11 or 12 years by my count. I used to have a podcasting, audio podcasting network back in the day, just trying to emulate, the likes of Leo Laporte with Twit, This Week in Tech, and all that good stuff. And we also met mainly through a game called Atmosphere. So thinking a little bit before Roblox, during the early days maybe of Minecraft, there was this game called Atmosphere, and a lot of us met each other through it. I ran the IRC channel for the community, and that's how we all met each other, and then spun it off to different ventures, and here we are 11, 12 years later, doing it all over again.
Come full circle.
basically have come full circle. But we're not here to recount the old days. We're here to talk about the state of accessibility in Pokemon Go. But first, we're going to lay the foundation of how you're tied into accessibility. So, James, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background.
Yeah. So, I was born with blindness, and a lot of people, when they think about blindness or disabilities in general, they think of an on and off switch. You either have it or you don't. With disabilities, though, it's very much a spectrum, right? Like to degrees, and so my vision, it's not correctable. I'm wearing glasses right now. These are for like blue shield, blue light, and helping with like just eye strain and stuff with computer screens. But I have about less than 10% of vision. It isn't correctable. At most, can be magnified very close up, a few inches away, but that doesn't do a whole lot for me. So I'm very like in tune with my hearing, tactile, things like that. So like I obviously can't drive. And I can navigate with a white cane, working on a guide dog. So that's currently something I'm just waiting on. So to give you a context of like where my blindness levels are at. So it's like I can see color, I can see shapes of objects that are pretty blurry, but it's all just a blur mess for me. And yeah. Right. For also just I guess how I got into accessibility. I need things to be accessible, to interact and be entertained and be involved. And so I became an advocate as I became an adult. And next thing I knew, I found myself from some of the videos I did on YouTube speaking at E3 for Jeff Keighley and talking on stage with like Microsoft and Sony reps. And we're talking about the current state of accessibility in gaming going into this next generation before PS5 and Series X and all that. And then I started consulting on games from a visually impaired player perspective and giving feedback and how developers can make their games more vision friendly. And so that way, none of us are guaranteed to have 20/20 vision, and especially later on in life. We are talking about preserving games. I want to make sure that the current games that are being made today are playable for everyone and anyone, whether you're blind tomorrow or 20 years from now. And blindness, again, being like various degrees of vision, right? Only about 15% of people are who are considered medically blind, totally blind. There's some context there, how I professionally got involved with the space.
Very good. So very interesting that you gave that statistic. 15% deal with some sort of visual blindness, whether it's totally or at least partial. And a good point that you made with the spectrum of how that works. Some people may have a full vision when they're born, but they may lose it over time due to age, or maybe perhaps something may develop that may cause the visual aspect of to be able to see to be lost, and so people can become somewhat disabled as life goes on. You don't have to be born that way.
Yeah, and in fact, statistically speaking, 1 in 7 people worldwide have some type of disability. 1 in 5 Americans, and that's across a huge spectrum of different disabilities and various degrees. But that's 1 billion people. That's a huge market to look out for, and I think that's one of the things that Niantic should really be considering, because when you're looking at it, and we can go further in depth with this, like as we continue the conversation. But our mobile phones. A lot of people ask me on Twitter, like, if they see my bio, they're like, if you're blind, how are you typing this? And I'm just like, the great thing is computers have been accessible. Like, even when I don't want to use any of the remaining vision I have, because it's just sometimes it's not practical. My phone talks to me. My computer can talk to me. It can navigate with voice. It can navigate by just text to speech, and it works with just keyboards. So it's great that like Android and iOS, like the two platforms that Pokemon Go is on, are like two of the most accessible platforms in the world. And so there's a huge market there to be capturing more players. That's a pun, Pokemon pun. Who have disabilities, and to like just better make your app accessible. And there's some things like technical accessibility that you could always be implementing, and Sony and Microsoft have been incredible with that lately. Even we're talking EA has been gotten pretty good. Ubisoft is another, but there's other things that they can just be doing that are just benefiting everyone, and general things. And I think that's a little bit of what we're going to be discussing too.
Awesome. So you already mentioned a couple of companies that you have consulted with before. We're going to be talking about that in a moment. But one question I had really quick, on like a day-to-day basis, how easily do you get around? Do you find it rather easy with either conveniences you have for yourself or public conveniences for those with accessibility needs? Do you find that it's pretty easy to get around, or you think there's more to be done that could help enhance the lives of those who may have a disability?
Yeah, so in America, there are some pretty developed cities that have a lot of like crosswalks that talk to you, or have tactile on the buttons to let you know when it's time and safe to cross. For me, a lot of blind folks go through orientation and mobility, and this is a thing that's usually offered by each state. I don't know where you would go every time, but typically, if you're visually impaired, your ophthalmologist or whomever will refer you to those services and get you set up with that. So I grew up taking orientation mobility in Pennsylvania, in Delaware, and I even got refreshed on it in California when I lived in Los Angeles. And that's just like where they teach you how to use a white cane, how to cross safely, how to know like what your danger car is, what cars to look out for, listen out for, pretty much. And even if you can't see the crosswalk, that's how us blind folks get around, is by listening to the flow of traffic, how far away it is, and stuff like that. So I navigate pretty well, and I'm looking to get a guide dog so that I can also just have a little bit more freedom. I went through sort of a trial with a guide dog, and I felt definitely a lot more freedom with it. And I know it's a whole different lifestyle change and things to be responsible for, but that is a think I'm on a waiting list for. I got accepted, got approved, and it's a several year process just because these dogs are like the most respected, the most, I think, well trained of any service dog, and they go like through a school pretty much on their own in the first like 2 years of their life, and you know, even to see if they're qualified to be a guide dog. Some of them don't want to be, and they just go off to a nice home. And so those dogs can cost anywhere from $45 to $70,000.
Oh my God.
That fee is not for the blind person.
Oh,
That's
good.
usually covered by sponsors and donors, a lot of corporate donors in the U.S. For a lot of these schools, but quite expensive dogs to train. And but they're, again, it's for safety. It's for just independence. So I'll be kind of hopefully playing Pokemon Go with a doggo companion in the next year here.
And I know a lot of trainers would love to see a good old doggo companion out there. Of course, if you ask permission first to pet the dog, because the dog is working,
Yep.
you gotta make sure to talk to the owner first before you do that. But so that's great that different states. I know New York is pretty high up on the list when it comes to accessibility. They're always touting whatever they're doing in the way of making progress. But it's great to hear that states here, at least here in the U.S., are doing whatever they can and making strides that they're making to make life more accessible for those who are blind or may have other disabilities. That's great to hear. Rotating over to talk about Microsoft and Sony and the work you've done, you got to tell me. So, how did you go from being the guy I knew making funny voices on Skype with interviews to being someone who does accessibility consultations with companies like Sony and Microsoft?
You know, I don't know. Like it just all kind of had kind of fallen together. I've always been interested in like filmmaking. That's a whole other, I think, aspect of me. I do a lot of documentary filmmaking and YouTube content creation. I grew up on YouTube, have a huge like interest and passion for the creator economy. And part of just that niche that I sort of fell into was people started asking, like, they noticed that my eyes were shaking, which is part of one of 3 eye conditions I have, called nystagmus, in a few videos. And people were just curious and commented about it. So I opened up about it. I talked about it, and eventually more people who had that condition or knew someone who did started finding that video. And next thing I knew, at like 18 or 19, I'm making videos pretty niche on like sharing my story about my visual impairment. But I love technology. I love gaming. And so I always wanted to incorporate that perspective into it. And sort of like where I've been pivoting with my content lately is covering consumer tech, a little bit about travel too, just like sharing experiences that are accessible, and gaming comes into that. So I try to cover gaming on my channel from like sort of a hardware OS level without really getting too much into game coverage. It's a whole, I feel like, other niche that is covered very well by a lot of other accessibility advocates. But yeah, I think it's just all sort of domino effect, right? It's just the right door opened, and eventually found my way, especially out in Los Angeles, to different opportunities, and fell into it that way.
I remember checking up on you. Man, I'm trying to remember how long ago it was now. I happened to see something about you. I don't remember. It might have been Instagram, since I know we're friends on Instagram, or perhaps it was Twitter, where I saw that you had a sit down with Apple CEO Tim Cook. I'm like, wait a minute. How did he go from the last time I spoke to him to sitting down with the CEO of one of the most valuable companies in the world, not just in terms of how much they make, but also the technology that they provide to the world? Like, how on earth did that happen? I had to say, and I remember, I think I messaged you on Skype because I was like, I'm not sure how to get in touch with him. I guess I'll just download Skype again and just message him on there or something. I think that's how I reached out to you.
Yeah, I don't even know if I was on Skype at that time, so I'll have to check if that message even got read. Man, yeah, because we pivoted. I think once it was like the 8.0 up. Once they like forced it to like compete with Snapchat, I was done, and I kept downgrading on the Mac to like 7.5 dot something, and they force updates, and Skype died. Pretty much, it was their own grave that they dug. I would have continued using it otherwise. Anyway, yeah, Tim Cook, Apple. So in 2016, when I was out in LA, I made a video about how Apple's technology impacted my life. And basically, like, when you and I knew each other, I was a MacBook Pro user. But I also was sort of just kind of crawling out of a pretty dark time in my life, from just, you know, growing up with a disability, and suddenly kids can be kids, and bullying happens and whatnot. And so I was just like trying to survive in school. And I never had actually been accommodated properly. I never learned Braille, even though I should have, because my eyes aren't very usable and I can't read more than like a paragraph of large text without eye fatigue. And it's just a lack of understanding of how like different ocular conditions work. So Apple's technology, Apple built in tons of accessibility into their operating system. And we're talking like the whole Mac OS. A blind person could set up a Mac on Mac OS Tiger. I even got one for fun for a YouTube video to set up a Mac from 2003.
Good old days.
Without looking. And yeah, the G4.
Oh man.
Great machine. I love that piece of hardware. But yeah, I was able to like navigate the setup process, open up iTunes, the web, which is completely broken because it can't handle a modern web. But it was really cool. And the fact that Apple's been doing that for so long, and for me to actually have some level, even like half as good of accessibility as what Apple offered out of the box, you had to like pay for all these third-party subscription applications, like ZoomText or JAWS, or these are just some apps for the blind that help make Windows possible. And they're good, they're great, and they serve that market, and they're usually covered and sponsored by schools or, you know, number of ways. But if I wanted to like continue into adulthood with these apps, I'd have to start forking that money over each year. And it's like, sure, I could buy a Windows laptop for, a certain amount compared to a Mac, or I could just buy a Mac and know that it's reliable, it's all baked in. And personally, I just wasn't the biggest fan of how Windows implemented a zoom or magnifier. It's running as a separate app. It was prone to crashing on a lot of the hardware I tried. Whereas Apple's, even on like a MacBook Air that had like a dual core processor, the zoom barely ever lagged, or it just felt so much more fluid and smooth and like a priority for them. So that's what pivoted me to the Mac. I made a video about that. Long story short, sharing my story and how this has enabled me to do video editing and pursue video content creation. That made its way around Mac blogs, and within 4 days, I had someone calling up from Apple's PR, and they were just wanting to make contact, let me know like, hey, we saw the video. It's been shared amongst the Apple stores during morning meetings, and we're, made it up to Phil Schiller, who was at the time VP of marketing. Little did I know that Phil Schiller was actually sharing the video with Tim Cook that very night. And after that phone call, 2 hours later, Tim Cook had tweeted it out. It was like the first, as far as I'm aware, in 2016, the first non-Apple thing, like in terms of like Apple corporate created content that Tim Cook ever shared on his Twitter. His is very kind of like PR centered. It's very much showing what the company's up to, what he's up to personally with his advocacy and stuff. And it was just really cool to have that shared. And next thing I knew, Good Morning America, CNN, all reaching out and like bombarding my inbox at like midnight. And no, it was cool. And so I kept that relationship going with Apple. I got invited to some WWDC events, could get loaner products for review and share my thoughts on. And then the next year around GAD, which is a Global Accessibility Awareness Day, it happens usually on the third Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, of every May. And it's just, Twitter's pretty big about it. A lot of tech companies, and I think gaming's been trying to get a little bit more involved with it too, like to just spread awareness about accessibility and have like workshops and try to bring some more people in the know about like best practices, and just being aware that like, hey, this technology is all out there and accessible, and like you can navigate your iPhone with just your voice, and it's all there, right? So I got invited to Apple's headquarters. At the time it was One Infinite Loop before Apple Park, to speak on stage at one of their GAD events that they're having. And it was me and a couple other advocates in the accessibility community, good friends of mine too, Ricky Pointer, who's deaf, and Tatiana Lee, wonderful actress who is a wheelchair user. And she shares her story about having a disability from birth and incorporates it into Hollywood. So we had a panel where we just talked about accessibility, media representation, stuff like that. And then next thing we knew, Tim Cook wanted to meet with us, and I got to have a sit down video interview with him, set it up myself, which was kind of like wild. Like
Wow.
Apple's people are all there, Tim Cook's entourage of, PR folks are all there, but they're like, I had my two cameras with me, my iPhone 7, which was our wide shot, two close-ups on the two Canon M50s, and they had me set up sound and lav mic him, and I'm just like, am I actually literally putting together this one-man show where I'm also appearing on camera? And it was wild. They let me do it all like my way, myself, and we just had a great conversation. He spent an hour with us, and I did a 12-minute interview. There may have been a little bit more I cut depending on content. I definitely still have all the raw of that, but did like a 12-minute interview just talking about automation in the home, Apple's accessibility history, and he even like brought up Steve Jobs being quite the advocate for text to speech and having the Mac talk so early back in like 1984, and how like a blind person could set up a Mac back in the 90s on their own with like third-party software that they were working with getting, and that's eventually developed into Apple's voiceover and all. So yeah, that's the long story, kind of condensed, but not like fully condensed. So
Wow.
hope that helps.
That helps a lot. Wow. When life gives you lemons, man, let me tell you. So you made a video out of earnest showing your love for the Apple ecosystem because of their dedication to making their hardware, their software more accessible to those with accessibility needs. And next thing you know, hi Tim Cook. Oh, we're gonna talk and have an interview. Okay. Wow, that's impressive, and I'm glad you had that opportunity. I'm happy to see how you've grown in that way in your content creator journey, because it's different from any other journey that I know of, and I can't think of anyone better for that kind of job, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. All right, now into the good stuff relating to Pokemon Go. All right, so you already admitted to playing Pokemon Go. Question is now,
Absolutely.
how did you get into it? Like, when did you start? Day one? How long have you been playing
Day
so
one.
far? Day one. Okay.
I definitely have like an old vlog on my YouTube channel. I'm not probably satisfied if I go back and watch it now with like the quality of the content. But when I was in LA, yeah, I was just heard it was launching in Australia. I was just sitting there waiting for the servers, to work, refreshing it. I lived in Los Angeles at the time in downtown, and where I lived was actually a Pokestop, which was pretty
Lucky.
nifty. Yeah, and then I eventually so everywhere I've lived since has been a Pokestop or a gym.
Okay,
Like, literally.
you're cheating. You're doing research
I know.
beforehand.
No, I'm not. No, so I moved down the street. Eventually, I just moved right into a gym where there's also a stop on the other side of the building. But I could reach it from where I was just by going down the hall. And then next place I moved into a park, quite literally like one of the few parks in downtown LA, which is kind of wild. It's near a school though, but living like in that block of a park, I had access to like 3 Pokestops just any time to spin from my apartment. And then when I moved to like the Hollywood Hills area, which I wasn't expecting to have access to Pokestops there, I did. It just so happened that like there was a business right in front of like where I lived, my like townhouse, and it was close enough where I could just spin that Pokestop every day. And now where I live, sort of around Philly, I also happen to have like 4 Pokestops on my block. So in a gym, actually 2 gyms now. One of the Pokestops turned into a gym. I don't know. You might understand how that mechanic works or what, but yeah, now we have 2 gyms literally plop right next to each other, so I can just put 2 things in and collect 100 coins a day overnight. So.
Lucky. Yeah, it's those POIs, especially if you lived in more of like a populated area. There's gonna be more POIs, more localized, they're more condensed, and so you have statues and park bench signs and different things that can be submitted as Pokestops and then approved and turned into stops. And if there's too many in one cell, they start promoting different stops into gyms. There's like a whole thing with how that works. It's a little complicated, but it's fascinating with how the game works for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely community driven, which I love, like in terms of your local community and just like how people contribute. Like people in my own building are contributing to this gym, and we're fighting each other late at night, hoping to like be the person to stay on and have it so we can get our 50 coins if we're not on the same team. So
Yep, that's a great community aspect of it. If you have more than one person you're building, there's constant interaction with that gym, which means that's actually a good thing. If
I
the
have
more,
lucked out.
oh,
There's quite a bit of Instinct team members here, which I
team
feel like we're
instinct.
fewer in numbers. The Zapdos electric type, it would just knock out Moltres and Articuno in a heartbeat. It's best competitively speaking. Um, I love electric types. Of course, I'm going Zapdos. I've always been that way. Jolteon's my favorite Pokemon. I got one like back there. I think Squirtle's blocking it.
Hey, that's fair enough, man. That's solid logic to it. I'm a Team Valor person myself, so obviously not the
Thunderbolt.
same team, but you know.
Thunderbolt.
So, with your experience with Pokemon Go and with your lifestyle, with how things go, how well has Pokemon Go integrated into your way of life?
Yeah, so I guess I can explain like what kind of Pokemon Go player I am. I play it kind of casually, but like almost daily. I took some breaks here and there, and I've definitely gotten back into it recently. And again, it's more of like I'm pretty casual with it. Where I definitely like I have some mons are in like the 4,000 CP and 3,000 CP, and I look out for like good IVs and stuff. But I'm not like always on it, I guess I could say. I try to hit the daily, streaks, but sometimes that's all I'll do in the day. It's just hit the stop that I live near, and that's it. So I guess it's the best way to kind of represent it. I haven't gotten too far into like the competitive. I do go on there and I play, and I seem to understand it to some degree because I will get like 3 to 4 matches in a row, in wins, but it definitely fits into a daily routine. Sometimes just for like 2 minutes. Sometimes if it's like community day, I'm playing it for 2 hours and going to the park and making that time. So
All right, fair enough. So it seems like you have a lot to do within the game, and you interact with it basically like anyone else I would know. So let's tie in the your usage of an iPhone. You have talked about being in the Apple ecosystem with a Mac and an iPhone. How well does iOS, your iPhone, integrate with Pokemon Go? Does it actually heighten your use of the game? Is it more helpful? Does it provide help for you with your visibility?
it does. Otherwise, it probably would not be playable. Just for context, like the menus and the icons are pretty small in Pokemon Go. I know this might be dependent on the device that you're playing on. On an iPad, it's a little easier because things get scaled up. But even on like an iPhone Pro Max, right? Those sizes, it's still too small for me to like really recognize everything. I just memorize where things are layout wise. But if there's like a new menu I need to like find or look for, I may not have like the best time. I have to then enable Apple's universal zoom, which works within any app. Fun fact, a lot of people may think at first if like I share a screenshot or a screen recording, or if anyone just looks at my screen, they might think I'm spoofing because Apple has a controller. It looks like a joystick.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it looks like a zoom. So it's called a zoom controller. It's for people who are visually impaired and need to zoom in on their screen. And I double tap it and I can drag in and out, and then I can change where the zoom is. Like I can kind of show you like where it is now. This is kind of what it looks like. It's sort of this blue.
Oh, it looks a lot like that
icon.
joystick. Okay.
Yeah, and you can change the color of it and stuff, but allows me to just like zoom in anywhere and access the zoom menu. Yeah, I've shared a few screenshots in the past of Pokemon Go, and then suddenly I got bombarded by random players who find it on Twitter. I'm like, "You're cheating," and I'm like, "No, here's what this is.
Oh,
A
man.
little educational moment. Just trying to celebrate the shiny or something I just got."
Come on, it's a fun moment. Come on, trying to ruin the fun.
Yeah, it's just people not being aware that accessibility features exist and can overlay in apps. But that aside, it works pretty well. The one thing that doesn't work, and I actually did talk to someone at Niantic at WWDC in 2017 about this to kind of get some context. VoiceOver is Apple's screen reader. It's what allows someone who is totally blind or doesn't want to use their vision whatsoever to navigate in their phone. A lot of apps, like you could open up Instagram and you can hear like photo, it'll describe the image, username, and start reading all that. Comment, text box, button, it describes what you're currently over, what it is, labels, all that. And you can navigate your finger around with the cursor. So that's VoiceOver. It's just reading everything aloud. that will just break or not work when you open up Pokemon Go.
Oh man.
And this happens for a lot of games, and that's just based on how games are sort of developed and made. And Unity, for example, is just not very accessibility friendly, and that's what Pokemon is based off of, Unity. So there is a little bit now of like discourse in the accessibility gaming community about like, all right, we've been pushing for developers to be doing some stuff, but what about these engine developers, people who are like providing the tools for developers? What if they made it easier for developers to, not put so much effort into creating accessibility features? And that's sort of like, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think Unity has made some comments about it. They've maybe started to implement some APIs to allow developers to have more accessibility. I don't know where the current state of that is at now. I think it's still pretty early, and some stuff may be pretty beta, but hopefully Niantic is paying attention to at least that. I know there's a whole other general discussion about accessibility in terms of physical movement and getting up physically as a person when it comes to like chronic illnesses and physical disabilities. But in terms of like technical stuff for visual impairment, they could be giving options to make menus a little larger. That'd be nice. If I could scale, that'd be great. And that's stuff I think they could definitely implement. I don't expect text to speech and voice screen reader support to be like supported tomorrow, but hopefully down the line. But there's also like things that they have sort of made themselves, being I don't know how many people use a Pokeball Plus or a Pokemon Go Plus, attachment to play. But currently that only works with Pokeballs. But I know some visually impaired people who love to use that, and people who have physical disabilities, because it's just sometimes easier if you have a hard time throwing Pokeballs with your hand, whether it's from arthritis or a variety of reasons. It's a little RNG. Pokemon has always been pretty much been brought up on RNG, but the ability to go into the settings of your Pokemon Go app and change the priority of what ball is maybe used, I think would make a huge impact.
That'd be huge.
Because right now it only works for Pokeballs, for people who don't know. You can't use Great Balls, you can't use Ultra Balls with those, and that's a paid accessory. So that's kind of an accessibility barrier right there. I have like 600 plus Ultra Balls stacked up, and I use them, but I've just been hoarding them too. And I'd love to use those. For a while, I was just tossing out Pokeballs before I started using the Pokeball Plus. Now I do hold on to them. Great Balls kind of get shafted. But, if I could use Great Balls and Ultra Balls more, I would, totally try to keep those around and prioritize using those with the Pokeball Plus or Pokemon Go Plus accessory. And, I think just a software update for Pokemon Go could just enable that feature, let you prioritize it in your settings, and you're good to go. Again, leave up to RNG, but at least then I have a higher chance at whatever I just found or caught to catch it.
You bring up some excellent points. Going back to the development of the game, it's not like the game obviously could use some work, but even the engine itself, that you blew my mind a little bit about that with Unity. I obviously, with me and my position, I don't necessarily know about how accessible the gaming engines are for what games are developed on. But when you said that it's not the most more accessibility friendly engine to use, that's mind blowing. I never thought about that in that way, and hopefully Unity does something to address it. But you also brought up, you actually were rolling into another couple of questions I had, and we can talk more about that in a second. But bringing up the point about being able to switch which Pokeball the game prioritizes, that has been something that has been asked by the community for the longest time. And someone in chat brought up a moment ago that it's a paid accessory that they don't even sell anymore for the Pokeball Plus. I know I have one around here somewhere that I can't find at the moment to show what it looks like.
I did check Amazon, and they're still available for $30, and they could be shipped tomorrow, at least where I am.
Ooh.
So it might be someone who's held on to inventory. Maybe they're not produced so much anymore, and they sell a pack of 2 for under like $60. So I know the Pokeball Plus, like the Let's Go one, that isn't sold, and that is hiked up to you can still get it tomorrow by shipping with Amazon, but it's like 130 or $40.
Yes,
so.
That one. That's the one that a lot of people like to use due to its dual functionality. Yes, you're correct. Yeah. People have been hiking up the prices on that like crazy. It's a shame. It really is. It's really the most useful out of the two, at least authorized third. Not even third party. They're just authorized to be used officially with the game. The original Pokeball Plus or the original catcher device, the one you just click the button. Yeah, it's great that it's available. Not the best. I don't personally own one. Plus, you have to swap the battery out and you got to do all that. Whereas with the Pokeball Plus, you can just plug it in and there you go, just charge it up that way. You can even use it while plugged in. But yeah, those have been great tools that have been introduced to the game. That I don't know. It just seems like they just left it after they finished. It's like, okay, it works. That's it. No updates to help with it. We pay for it. We play the game. We gather all the data that Niantic is using for their purposes, because we know ultimately their goal is AR. Right? They're an AR company. Pokemon Go has been a huge boon for them in terms of making money, also the helping to develop whatever they need in order to fully launch into the AR space. Because we know John Hanke had a presentation like last November where he was showing off like the AR goggles and how it would work in like a real world use case scenario, and I want to get your thoughts on that later. But it's really cool to see where they're going with it, but they need to help. They need to give us a little bit more on our end in terms of what our money goes into and accessibility in the game, which leads me to my next question. How accessible do you think Pokemon Go is in 2022 with all the developments that they've made so far? How successful do you think how accessible, excuse me, do you think the game is at its current state right now?
So, technically speaking, it's not. When you look at the checkboxes of like what makes a game accessible for, when you look at something like The Last of Us Part 2, and I'm not sure, like, for those familiar with PlayStation, their ecosystem, for example, this game won Game of the Year, as well as winning innovation in accessibility. And that was an award at the Game Awards. That game has been fully playable by totally blind players. And that's a 3D cinematic action game.
Wow.
With like puzzles, and you have people who are totally blind, not looking whatsoever, who can distinctly know each sound in the game. It has text to speech, so every menu is read aloud. And then if you just sit there idle, it'll tell you what actions you can take for things like crafting. And that's because Sony, they saw it was a value of theirs to make their games as accessible to age, right? Like this helps games age well, because gaming is becoming a much more popular hobby amongst older crowds too. And I think that's partially because they're nostalgic for it. And people who are older today were younger, back in the 80s and 90s. But a lot of those games may not be so playable for them as you age and get older and or have a disability. Whereas the games I'm hoping that are being made today and tomorrow will continue to be like that for years to come, for the next generation too. But with that said, it doesn't check box many things. Now there's other accidental accessibility, and this is what Nintendo's actually kind of good at. And that's when they just kind of make a game and approach it without thinking about accessibility in mind, and then it just kind of becomes inconsistent amongst various titles. For instance, like Mario Odyssey has a thing called an assist mode, and because I can see the color blue, these arrows pop up and show me which way I can go. And I could actually get through my very first 3D Mario game from like start to finish, because I have no depth perception. Everything's blurry. 3D spaces are, can be a little messy for me with games, but they're fun. And Mario Odyssey was a ton of fun because it was forgiving for me for just randomly jumping off the edge because I just couldn't see that there was an edge under me. And so the assist mode kind of gives you some extra lives, take a little extra damage, which is beneficial for me, for a person who's visually impaired. But at the same time, Mario Odyssey didn't have like the menus read aloud. It didn't have the option to change the text size if I wanted it to be larger. It didn't have remappable controls within the game. Switch now does have that in general, but when it's in-game, per game, that's when it's a little easier, especially for people with physical disabilities, because then they can map out custom controllers, accessibility-related controllers, get like either a Hori accessibility controller or like a Xbox access controller and hook it up with an adapter on the Switch. That's where, like, when they're thinking about that, those are like the technical accessibility, and they're typically in tune with the community, especially on Twitter and other places. But they have had some good accidental accessibility, and it's because they've been thinking about the pandemic overall at times. They're also sometimes thinking that it's over when it varies region to region and,
Oh,
and
yes.
even state to state, town to town. And I just know it's been very helpful. There's a great website called caniplaythat.com. CIPT, their publication, just completely just self-funded, from disabled journalists who review games based on accessibility. And they did a whole article recently about the changes in Pokemon Go. And they just wanted to bring awareness about how these changes will impact players in general, but also those who maybe are a little bit more at home because whether they have chronic illnesses or, I mean, I even think about there's so much happening in the world right now, from war, conflict. I won't get too much into that, but then there's also weather. There's hearing tons of just wild weather, tsunamis or winter storms every weekend, and like that's going to impact someone's community day. And then when you scale back the time at which they can like participate and be as involved as someone who lives in sunny California and just happens to not have an earthquake or fire season that day, and can just go out and go for a hike with 30 shinies, while someone else was like able to get maybe 20 spawns and one shiny, that hopefully at least, it makes a difference in people's experience, and they may not be as enticed to like continue playing. They might want to just step back from the game and find something new to play. And I think that, I mean, overall it just hurts Niantic's bottom line, their dollar. And you hope that maybe there's an outcry and a bigger concern in the community, and we saw that, I think, back with the changes to the radius of Pokestops and hitting gyms. Suddenly, the Pokestop that is like on my block, I couldn't hit it from my apartment. I could hit it from like down the hallway if I am willing to put some shoes on, some pants, and walk down the hall without disturbing my neighbors. But now I can hit it again from just my room, which is cool. Entices me. It gives me a reason to get back on the game and to keep playing. And they get my money because I will continuously be involved and get some remote raid passes, and want to get like a box, right, for community day in anticipation. So Pokemon Go has some accidental accessibility, and I think if Niantic recognizes that these features are just making it more accessible, making the game more profitable, and making the user base larger, hopefully then they can revert whatever changes they're making now that aren't good and negatively impact, but also continue to develop the accidental accessibility, the more like vague, open-ended accessibility, I would say, to then hopefully get into the more of the technical stuff. I know people at Niantic who are advocates for accessibility in gaming, but unfortunately, they don't make those decisions. They don't get to choose what their project management is going to be. But hopefully they can hear it from the community that more people want to play and be involved and included. So, and in the end, accessibility just helps players who've been invested over time. The game's been out for how many years now? People are getting older. Again, we just had not to like get too much like on the Debbie Downer side of it all, but we just had a pandemic. I mean, we still are in it, and there's a new wave of people with disabilities who are going to be impacted long term by a virus going around. So, and a lot of that is body fatigue. A lot of it is chronic illnesses. So if Niantic can, they're losing some players who definitely played Pokemon Go, but can't play as much to the same physical extent. So by including that, like, it just I think helps their bottom line, but they just kind of need to recognize and realize that.
But your answers are absolutely amazing. I just gotta say, you really brought it home on that last part right there. There are newly vaccine injured people or COVID injured people, whether people they react to the vaccine wrong. I don't know exactly the numbers for that, how much it is versus actually contracting COVID, which I'm sure the number is probably way higher than that. Those who have survived it and have developed either newly found for them disabilities or what have you. It's changed how life is being lived for a lot of people, and a lot of people are going to be dealing with the after effects of COVID for a really, really long time. Unfortunately, I don't have those figures in front of me, but that was a great point that they need to be thinking about the bigger picture, right? In terms of the new players that may be coming on board and people who didn't make it out of, well, I say make it out of COVID. COVID's still here, but they didn't make it through the throes of the pandemic, the same that a lot of us have, where a lot of us, may still be healthy whether we contracted COVID or not, but some people, their lives have been altered from anywhere from a little bit to a lot. And they really should be looking at the bigger picture. And yes, there are people who are accessibility minded at Niantic, not in the positions to call the shots on projects and what gets prioritized in terms of the development of the game. And I guess we just need to continue to bring it up, either Twitter, social media, whatever platform people can. Whenever something goes on, just keep bringing up the fact that, hey, there's still some things that can be done to make this game more accessible. We're 5 years into, almost 6 years into the development of this game, and who knows how long even before 2016, when the game even started its initial development. And there's still a lot more that can be done. We're obviously, the game's not done being developed, but there's a lot more that needs to be done to make this game more accessible and just more playable in general. We're putting our hard-earned money, our time, our most valuable resource, time, to playing the game, opening up the game, whether you're playing it from home or you're playing it to and from work, you're intentionally going out to play, whatever your use case is, whatever your scenario is. We're putting our time into it, and it's not time we're going to get back. We want to make sure that we spend our time the very best way we can playing the game, the way that it should be played. And obviously, I'm not expecting Niantic to just snap their finger and then just have the game just magically just catch up to where it needs to be today. But I'm hoping that with the community continuing to outcry with where the game is right now, that Niantic just snaps out of it, and hopefully whoever the right person is within the within the organization just says, hey, maybe we should prioritize this. Because here's the thing: the game is going to be changing. People forget that this AR headset being developed is going to be associated with Pokemon Go, to be able to see Pokemon, Pokestops, and things as it's in front of you with augmented reality. Like, we have that coming up. How is that going to work for people like you, James? How is are you going to be able to use a device like that, or are you just going to continue playing the game, perhaps just the way it has been so far?
Glad you brought that up, because I recently shared it. It's on my Twitter. I contributed to an article that my friend Grant Stoner did. He's a awesome journalist who happens to have a physical disability, and he was talking about how VR could be more accessible and the potential there. And there is definitely some movement, but I think it's going to come down to the companies that are developing these and their priorities. I do have high hopes and expectations if Apple is getting into that space. That won't ship until there is full accessibility involved, or at least, I know for a fact. I don't know how much. I know from a fact just that the Apple Watch did not ship right away until it had a screen reader built in. So a blind person who opened up an Apple Watch first generation could triple click on the side button, and then it was talking to them, and it would walk them through the steps and different gestures to interact with it without even knowing what's on the screen. So hoping that other companies that do get involved, Microsoft has done incredible things lately. Not sure where they're going to stand with the HoloLens, if that's even going to make a mainstream product anytime soon, or if it's just going to kind of stay in beta and enterprise. But, we'll see how this sort of space develops. But Grant Stoner did an awesome article all about how accessibility in VR can be fleshed out from multiple voices in the community. And for me, sound plays a huge part in it. If sound is considered, and for me, I'm wearing AirPods Max right now. These have spatial audio support. When I watch a movie, I can hear distinctively where different sounds are coming from. Sony has also done some really cool things with the PS5 and 3D Pulse headset with 3D audio in games like Spider-Man, and you can really hear the different the distance. So when I play Spider-Man on the PlayStation, there's beacons that are put up sound beacons to know where my next target, where I need to swing from. And I don't even have to see it. I don't have to look at it, but I know how far away it is based on how far away that sound is coming from when you wear these like headphones or if you have like a surround sound setup. So sound can play a huge part, and I think a lot of people think about the visual aspect of AR and VR, but sound is a huge component in that. Even a filmmaker, content creator, audio is 50% of video, and same thing goes for video games too. So it needs just as much care and love and quality as you would put into your visuals. With that too, again, just technical accessibility, text to speech menus could always be implemented if they're really trying to hit certain check marks. And for me, having menus at a good scale is important because I can make out a little bit more detail from a couple inches from my face. So VR headsets can actually be a little bit more visually accessible than any other game console, no matter how big my TV is. The Switch OLED's cool, but like the thing is, menus are still small. Developers are like, oh, cool, we have an HD screen to work with, even though it's 7 inches. I even think about the horror that is using a Switch Lite. They'll just scale their UI and their menus to like an unnecessary amount to make it so small because they think the resolution is what matters. So playing like old game consoles like the DS and 3DS XL, that was cool because it was such a low res screen that the menus are all so big, and I could actually like, cool, I can actually kind of make this out when it's like up to my face. With VR, I think it's just important to have scalable menus, at least large print, for considering users who don't have 20/20 sight. And because when a VR headset is on my face, I can't adjust that much. It's not like a DS where I could move it closer to my face suddenly and try to read that, okay, flamethrower attack, Pokemon Sun, cool. But I don't have that luxury. It's like, it's where it is. So hopefully developers are considering these factors. There's a lot to consider. And I haven't tried out a PlayStation VR. Again, PlayStation doing a lot of great things. I've worked with them personally or as one of their consultants. I'm hoping to like learn more about this PSVR 2 and praying that like accessibility is just only going to be baked in there, or it's going to be planned for like within the roadmap of the first year of launch. And yeah, hopefully we'll get a good idea at like how accessibility can develop in this space.
For sure. I'm hoping a lot of companies are just they're starting to think more in that area because accessibility is a huge thing. And speaking of accessibility, also want to also bring up the fact that like in cases of like Pokemon Go where you're playing maybe outside with like large groups of people, there's also things to consider like anxiety. There's also hidden disabilities that other people have to deal with as well. That we don't, there's no physical manifestation of it. We don't know what everyone's going through. Everyone has their story, everyone has their own thing, and some people do deal with hidden disabilities that should also be acknowledged in with how gameplay works, and that includes with things like increased Pokestop spins. Like maybe you don't have to be near the stop or maybe as many people to do your thing with the Pokestop, but also going back to the main thing that's being talked about on that about right now, like on social media, on Twitter, Incense. How do you feel about the current changes in Incense? Going from every 30 seconds being stationary to every 5 minutes being stationary, and kind of being forced to have to walk around to get more Pokemon to spawn. How do you feel about that development compared to what we were dealing with during the pandemic?
Having a lot of friends who have like physical disabilities, and it's not as easy to just walk outside and make that time or that physical energy to do that, but they might want to play Pokemon Go. I just know this past community day has not been the same experience as they've had for the last couple years, and negatively. So I know for myself, I didn't even participate as much this year. I had some things to do, and I opened it up for a bit, but things were taking a while to spawn, so I just got one shiny, and I kind of called it a day just because I was a little preoccupied. And when the spawn rate was like 30 seconds, I personally going through trying to catch something checking for shinies, all that. I got a little overwhelmed. I'm not gonna lie with how many things were popping up. And again, maybe it's because I live kind of next to a Pokestop and a gym, so things are kind of within radius. I got overwhelmed personally with how many things there were to check and look around for. However, I'd rather take that than having a drought in my game just because I can't happen to get out right now. Or for all I know, like, what if something's happening outside? It could be bad weather, it could be political government conflict, right? You know, something that's not safe for me to go out and play community day just because it happens in my neighborhood. It's not happening everywhere. But there are real players who are experiencing that right now. And I think it's important for Niantic to be mindful of that. And I know there have been instances where like community day has been delayed in a certain region because of something, but it's been pretty rare and it's inconsistent. And it would be like not even have to, it's not something they'd have to think about if the spawn rate didn't change, or at the very least compromise and at most make it 45 seconds, 60 seconds, right? Like a huge difference between that and 300 seconds. So, and I feel like even that 60 seconds, I wouldn't be as overwhelmed with everything spawning and checking for shinies. You want to get as much as you've been getting for the last, I mean, if they really need to compromise, which they don't have to, but that's sort of a thought that I had. It shouldn't change. I think it should stay where it's at. It's the best decision to do that. If it were to change, it should not be 300. I think it's pretty unacceptable, and it's going to hurt their bottom line, as kind of mentioned before, and people are going to be less invested. And again, it's great that some players do have the physical attributes to go out and be able to participate and happen to live in the neighborhood where they can do that and feel safe and comfortable to walk out and be preoccupied on their phone without worrying as much about their surroundings. But like, I know for me, it's a lot for me, even though I feel pretty good in my area and there's a lot of Pokestops to interact with, it's a lot for me because my hearing is super important. I can't really use my eyes when I'm walking, and I'm very much, when I'm playing Pokemon Go and I'm walking with my white cane, a future guide dog, I'm playing based on sound, which I will say Niantic has done a pretty good job at the distinct sounds, hearing the Pokeball being thrown. I have like an AirPod in so I can listen for traffic, I can listen for people jogging around me and whatnot, being aware of all that. But it lets me also just listen to my game with the AirPods Pro transparency mode, and I can know like when I'm tossing a Pokemon out and being transferred to the professor, and just memorization, right? Learning the layout of the menus. So that helps, but I think it'd be very helpful, and I'd probably consciously play the game more if this spawn rate did not change.
That's fairly reasonable. That's been the sentiment for a lot of people in the community, that it should have been left alone, or even your compromise of 60 seconds. I'd be down for that too. That would make the game more playable. I'm even thinking outside of like what I do. I stream on Twitch, and some of what I do is actually I stream Pokemon Go. And I at least part of the streaming experience has been using Incense while interacting with my community. That's been taken away. But even outside of that, just think about the general playability of the game has drastically been changed. I've even found myself playing less and to be honest, caring less about the game, and that's the reality for a lot of people, especially for those with disabilities and different accessibility needs. It's I believe the same you do, that it's going to hurt their bottom dollar. The question is, how long do they need it to hurt for before they do something about it? You know, it's not something I don't think they could go long term on. They're going to need to acknowledge at some point, and looks like there's a new movement on Twitter trying to kick up enough attention to, again, with like Hear Us Niantic the last time. There's more attention again, trying to call them, hey, you said you're going to do A, B, C when we last talked about this. Did we forget about that? Did we not have that conversation? Why are we going through this again? And it's not even a full year later. What? Maybe 6 months, maybe within that window, somewhere around there, that we're still dealing with that, and it's disappointing. You know, you would think that they would actually be listening to us. And maybe they're trying to. Maybe the problem is that maybe they don't have enough people for it. I don't know how many people work for Niantic or how many people work in different departments for different things. Obviously, there's different roles at Niantic for different things that need to be done with whatever they're working on. And only part of those people are working on Pokemon Go. They're not all like assigned to Pokemon Go. That may be the moneymaker, but there's other things going on with that company. They're an AR company after all. So yeah, a lot of things need to be changed. And another a chat question. Someone submitted a question from chat about accessibility wise. What are some things they specifically said 5? If you have 5 or wherever you have 5 things that need to be changed in Pokemon Go, what would you point out first?
I think reverting what they've already kind of done would be important, and then just kind of building upon that. Again, I know there was some talk in chat. 60 seconds could be great, 75 possibly. It also would allow the player to go off and check other things in the app, check on friends, send gifts, check their tasks, and without being overwhelmed with the amount of spawns, especially on a community day where like there is just that increase. But even then, 30, I think if they just reverted it, I think it would cater to most people. And that aside, I would love to see scalable menus, larger text in the game, so that I can personally, like, if menus change, if things get moved around in the settings or new options show up, I can just make it more visible for someone like me who has less than 10% of sight that isn't correctable. Because even though I do have the zoom controller and I can magnify into it, sometimes it can be in the way, especially when I'm like in a battle. I have to move that around to make adjustments for where it's comfortable for my thumb with the Pokemon on the side who I could swap into. Sometimes it gets in the way. I have to be conscious of that when different types of moves, charged moves, are coming up. Suddenly, like, okay, if I'm using a grass type or a flying type and it's coming in from the side, I have to like quickly move it down to the corner. That way, because I've had it where I'm using a charge move and my zoom controller, the Apple Zoom overlay button, is kind of in the way, and then I miss some of the charge energies. I don't know exactly how they call it in the Pokemon Go, but I'll miss it, and then I don't have an excellent move, unfortunately. But yeah, it's things like that. I personally wouldn't mind just being able to change the scale, and I know that they can do it because you look at the iPad, you play Pokemon Go on an iPad or a tablet, it scales to that screen. Things get larger, menus, text size is bigger. Maybe I just need to play on an iPad more, but I mean, I sometimes want to be portable. I'm not going to take an iPad Pro 12.9 inch with me to the park. It's just in general. And yeah, other than that, the Pokeball, I think the Pokeball Plus, maybe even like, I know there's been some talks about the production. I don't know. I know there's some counterfeit ones, most likely. I totally like believe that because there's a market for it, for sure. But I know when I went on Amazon, it said that I had purchased this Pokeball Plus or not Pokeball, sorry, the Pokemon Go, the wristband one, back in like 2017, and it says it's the same listing, and that one could ship to me for $30 tomorrow. I don't know if I get the same product, at the end of the day, if it's actually a counterfeit or not, but at least supporting the people who do already have those or buy them on the secondhand market to be able to just use different Pokeballs. It'd make the game more accessible for many people. I know for me, if I can just play with haptics and sound, I'll deal with the RNG and all that, and I'll check what I got when I get home. But I think that'd be really cool because I could then more reliably play and make use of the 700 Ultra Balls I've been hoarding. And then, yeah, eventually they need to explore technical accessibility. I'm sure they're a huge influence for Unity. I know other developers are trying to push for Unity to better support a lot of APIs for text-to-speech, closed captioning for cutscenes and menus, things like that. So I think they can also just be advocates for that too, and allies. More movement and more advances, innovation in that space will continue to grow and evolve. So, and just being aware too about accessibility needs when it comes to AR. I know that they're developing probably some pretty wild stuff, and when that comes and is ready to launch, whatever that might be, whether it's hardware or not, or they're working with another hardware manufacturer on that, I just hope that they consider all the accessibility possibilities for AR and VR because there's a lot and lots of potential there. It's just tapping into it.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there's a lot of work that can be done in terms of things that need to be changed or added to the Pokemon Go player experience for current use and for future use cases for sure. And going along those lines, we had another chat question, and this person asked, "Do you rate games using a scale of 1 to 10? Like, how do you rate your games and like with criteria in terms of accessibility and depending on how you rate games when you go to review them per se. How would you rate Pokemon Go?"
So, although I review some products and I'm actually pivoting more towards doing more journalistic reviews in video format on my YouTube channel for hardware, I haven't really considered game reviews as much. I know there's certain things I look out for in general in terms of like gameplay and ease of access, right? Like, how scalable is this experience for all kinds of players? Can I quickly swap? Say you're playing a single player game, can you change from being, I started up on moderate thinking, okay, let's give this a try. Maybe it's too difficult or some bosses are just not vision accessibility friendly at all. And I need to scale it to be like, all right, we're going to go in easy mode or, casual mode or whatever it might, call it. And then, get back to moderate when I'm progressed through that part of the game. I think that's sort of a great way to implement difficulty. In terms of Pokemon Go's accessibility, and thinking about all that in general, it is a little hard, I think, to rate accessibility overall because my needs are going to be different from someone else, right? Other people who are visually impaired may prefer different things like dark mode or invert colors, and a lot of that can be done on the system side when it comes to display accommodations. But if Niantic is aware of all the accessibility options on a system level, or even consider that maybe someone running Android 10 is not going to have the same options that someone who needs accessibility who's using Android 12 has access to, or iOS, or maybe someone's playing on like an iPhone SE first generation maybe, and again it could be a various answer, I think, but overall how I would rate it, I'd say there's a lot of work to be done and they need to really prioritize ease of access to the game and consider not just accessibility needs for individuals, but where people live, what's happening outside their doors. Because I can guarantee you there are some people who are sheltering somewhere in the world. We can definitely name places we want, but I don't know if this is really the platform to do that. But there are people who are sheltering, who are probably trying to play Pokemon Go, who happen to have, a 4G connection and finding it to be a time to connect with others, receive gifts from other people from around the world, and send things. And but if they walk outside, it's not safe, because there's active conflict happening in the world. But Pokemon Go is helping them cope. But then suddenly, by changing things, making the game less playable for someone who has to not be as mobile or be as physically active, it's gonna hurt the experience for tons of players for a variety of reasons.
That's a great point to jump into. That you've actually kind of been like weaving this like throughout our conversation we've been having here, where there's things that go on in the world, weather related, conflict related, natural events happening, that things that are outside of our control that they happen, right? It's unfortunately a part of life. It's just how things are outside of our control, and it would be great to have the kind of scale or the attention paid to these things where if something's happening one place, if maybe if they got to pause something there or delay something in the event community, whatever it may be, and reschedule for another time, if they did that more often, because you mentioned before that it's kind of rare. It is kind of rare. I remember one specific instance was Nidorino and the Gengar Raid Day. I think it was. It was delayed in Japan for a really, really long time. I don't remember specifically. I don't know if it was a monsoon or or something that delayed it, but it got delayed for a while until they finally had their event well after we did. But those instances are very, very far and few in between. Things like that need to be actively paid attention to in terms of gameplay for people around the world. And if you're dealing with players in like an active conflict area, what does that mean for that? Does it mean that maybe they just disable most things in the game just for general safety's sake, or would it be better in this case where maybe Incense gets boosted because they can't just go anywhere because you just don't know what's going on out there? There's no certainty about what's going on outside of the four walls it may be. Or if there are even four walls to be in. Unfortunately, that's the reality for a lot of people right now, and it's just a lot of things we do need to consider. They need to consider in terms of general playability around the world, because we're not all living the same. We're all living there in the same time. The reality may be a little bit different. It may look a little bit different for each and every one of us as players, and I would like to see Niantic move a little bit more of a better direction in that area of things. But yeah, I mean, James, you've been super fantastic with answering a lot of the questions that we've had in our community, anywhere from general accessibility questions to really specific things about Incense, with how that's affected everyone all over the place, all over the spectrum, with the general playability, with how the game just functions in everyday life. It's just it's hard to play the game for a lot of people right now, and that is just how that is. We even had one question, and this is getting really, really specific, because a little bit outside of the conversation of accessibility. But in terms of Pokemon Go being under the umbrella of Niantic, do you think there are any companies out there that may perhaps better handle development of a game like Pokemon Go than Niantic? Is there another company who may have a better vision for accessibility across the board, who would bring the game in a better direction, say if things were not to work out with Niantic for one way or another? Is there someone else that has the current capacity to be able to take on a game like that and make improvements for the betterment of the community and for the game?
So I'm going to answer this in a slightly different way, but I know there's people who are very passionate about Pokemon and Pokemon Go in general at Niantic, and people who, and I don't want to take their product away from them. It's a similar thing to like when people say Game Freak can develop Pokemon or whatnot. I think it's totally okay to collaborate and bring in other studios, or to help bring in accessibility consultants too. Like, that's how I got involved with PlayStation, with Sony, and other developers. I was brought in to be like, all right, I'm gonna play this build, see how it goes. Here's all my feedback. Sometimes they capture me and my reaction live, doing it. But they could work with accessibility consultants. As far as I know, they have not actively done that. Pretty well in tune, and Niantic's interested. I'm happy to work with them on that from a visually impaired user standpoint. I know many other people, various other disabilities and consultants, who they should definitely consider for various reasons. And so there are stakeholders for Niantic, right? When Pokemon Go was announced, Google, Nintendo, and the Pokemon Company were all like investors. And I'm sure there's other parties maybe quietly involved, or if you have a public IPO, different story there too. But Google has done some incredible things with accessibility. I mean, the Android operating system has come such a long way. And I think competition for accessibility is very healthy too. I think iOS helped nudge Google, and then Google using its resources, right? For something like YouTube. YouTube has had automated captioning, hasn't been great, but it's really helped advance in the scenarios where you need auto captions, or it's the only option. I always, for content creators, advocate for manual captions, and to invest in that. If you can invest in other things, invest in making your content accessible properly. But that aside, Google has had like 300 hours of different video content, audio uploaded to their servers every minute for the last several years, to just analyze and transcribe. And using all that data and all that technology, Android can now just transcribe, again, maybe not to 100% accuracy, but to a good amount, anything in the OS. You get a phone call. If you're hard of hearing or you're having a hard time hearing them, it'll just transcribe to you what it believes is in real time too. It's called live captions, I believe. Um, and even if you're using something like Twitch, as far as I'm aware, even if a creator doesn't have captions enabled on their Twitch stream, Google could provide it with their built-in Android technology, which is pretty cool. I wish Apple would also do a little more with hard of hearing and deaf accessibility, because why not? But that all aside, Google, I know, has been involved, and not to go too off the rails, but I think Google could definitely have some help or influence for Niantic. I don't know how involved they are today or how much they communicate, but I think it'd be great. I think it really just comes down to the top people at Niantic need to reevaluate like the accessibility of their game, need to consider the inclusivity that accessibility provides, and maybe just readjust the roadmap forward so that they're prioritizing the accidental accessibility that's already been implemented, from the pandemic. Revert those changes, build upon them, come to some happy middle ground. That way there aren't these like community backlash moments that kind of keep happening, and they aren't like completely rolling back and scaling. And it was such short notice too. It's like before they're like, well, a month ahead, and then it was like a day right before Community Day too that the Incense change happened. And that's not a good way to community manage, to build rapport with your user base. People who are going to give you their hard-earned dollar for a service game. You rely on constant flow of income. If people ain't happy, and that's the common feeling of the game moving forward, especially if it gets worse and worse, that flow of income is gonna dry. And so it's something that they definitely need to, I think, just take a look at and just reprioritize, and definitely maybe reach out to their current stakeholders, such as Google, with accessibility. Nintendo is also a little behind on the accessibility movement a bit. They're not as involved or vocal. I know some folks at Nintendo who are incredible accessibility advocates and know that stuff, but they don't get to make those decisions all the time, and they want to be involved, but they can't represent their company on Twitter and whatnot. So again, I think there's a lot that can be done, and you just got to start with what can they revert back, just listen and build upon it.
Great answer. And as you were answering that, I was thinking about how really success within the accessibility scene really won't be seen unless accessibility is being thought like first and foremost, right? Like I would say it's probably easier to start with that from the ground up in mind, and then you can continue to develop it as you go. But with a game so far in development, I'm not sure in terms of game development if this is considered late in the game, far into the game, where it's just harder to incorporate something like accessibility, or if further enhances accessibility in a game. I don't know if it's too far or too late. Definitely don't think it's too late. There's definitely room for improvement in the game, but yeah,
it's just one quick example.
Yeah, go for it.
Is just Fortnite. Fortnite's been a service game. It's been around for a long time. It just relies on active users to continuously come back. They've added some accessibility over the years. And just, I think it's never too late. It's you can always be late to the game, but it's a matter of showing up and being involved and communicating. I think if they can just show up and know that, hey, if we want to make our game more accessible, be open about it. We'd love to get more accessibility consultants involved to just like make the usability of our game better. I think that's what's important. I mean, Fortnite, for example, at some point, season 5, 6 maybe, incorporated a thing called, oh man, I can't remember a visualizer, but it's for deaf players, people who are hard of hearing, because that game is so reliant on sound. It visualizes where you are based on how your camera's moving, how you're moving, where a sound is coming from. So that way, like, you can see the noise pretty much. And I've used it myself, and it's pretty cool. That way I can like play with like music playing, or I can turn it down and know a little better that like, there are footsteps coming from this side. And you could hear that all if you're just playing, right? If you're a sighted player, if you're a hearing player, you'll know that. But it just makes the game more accessible for players who are hard of hearing and deaf.
Excellent point. Who would have thought Fortnite would be leading the way in first person shooter accessibility development? It's kind of funny. I never would have thought it, and I know we have some people in chat that that are fans of Fortnite, and they were pretty stoked to hear about that for sure. But another good point actually being brought up in chat is that it's all a question of money, right? Accessibility costs money. You got to pay the developers to develop. You got to pay the consultants to consult, right? For accessibility, you got to pay the developers to develop, and it costs money. And if they're getting less and less of it, how more likely are they to actually go further in the accessibility direction? You know,
There's a misconception I think about the cost of accessibility a bit. I mean, I can just tell you from my personal experience. Again, even though I do content creation and stuff, I have been involved with film, and I was a commercial film director, and still take on things like that if they come my way. And I feel like it aligns well, but I didn't. I directed an entire like $500,000 campaign for Tommy Hilfiger back in 2018. So we directed a series of like 9 commercials, 2 major ones that aired throughout the fall season in the spring of 2019. That campaign went to Cannes Lions Advertising Festival of Creativity. It used to be known as Cannes Lions Advertising Festival, but that's like the biggest marketing expo or award show. I spoke on stage, and we had conversations about disability representation, accessibility as a market, and the disability market in general. But we learned, based on the data collected, there's a $1.6 trillion market for customers with disabilities. There's $1.6 trillion of income that can be spent for products that are accessible. And I can tell you, based on, I mean, from my experience using Apple products, the fact that Apple has kept their products accessible over the decades and pushing that and improving it with every software release. I'm a loyal customer. I went from having one MacBook Pro, worked perfect, switched from my Samsung to my Android to my iPhone, and then the accessibility for my mobile device improved. And it's just because they kept up with it and they were kind of faster and quicker to it. And now I got 2 Macs. I've had multiple over the years, but iPad, Apple TV, HomePods, which that, I'll be honest, isn't the most accessible because it's Siri, and I just got an Echo, which is much better in terms of.
I was wondering about that. I saw you bought that recently.
Yeah, HomePods are great as speakers, and I'm going to keep them as my spatial audio surround sound speakers for my Apple TV. But my Echo is what I will ask requests from, because one area that Apple has fallen behind is their assistant that I will not deny. But anyway, I think overall you build up a loyal customer following when you really think there are a billion people with disabilities, and you know what products work for you. As you release new products or updates, you're just going to have that loyal user base over the years. It's really hard for me to switch over to an Android. I have a Google Pixel, but that was provided to me by Google. The 5A, and that was just them being like, hey, want to make a video about it? Sure. I gave it a try. I'm pretty new, and I set it up without looking, and it's a lot more accessible than it was 5 years ago, Android in general. And I was pretty impressed, and I'm like, hey, if you want Android, if the benefits of Android work for you, Google's got your back, and I think they're highly investing in accessibility moving forward. So now Google's capturing all these people who want accessibility in their products for years to come. And Niantic can do very much the same thing. So I think ultimately, yes, there's some level of investment in it, but I think the payoff is a lot better, especially when it is this like surface level accessibility, like just increasing things like values that make the game more playable for more people in more places. And reverting something that you just changed, that doesn't take too much manpower. But when you start adding on the layers, like making sure it's screen reader accessible, it works with, the third-party Switch accessories for people. Switch as in like people with physical disabilities who interact with computers and iPhones with buttons on their wheelchair, stuff like that. That's definitely a bit more of an investment. I think something to consider, but hopefully that's something on the roadmap because they're just prioritizing it and valuing it. So.
That's a great point. It's about priority and value. Do companies like Niantic value their player base? I'm sure they do. Obviously, it's doing a lot for them. But just exactly where is the priority being placed within that value of the player? You got to keep the players happy, to keep helping you with data to keep developing your products, right? And also for revenue, because you're going to need revenue to continue the development of your game. And with the current state, actually is rolling right into the next one of the last points or questions I want to bring up into the current state of Pokemon Go. With how the game is being developed so far, with let's just take a recent history. Let's take maybe the last year, right? Let's take the last year. Where do you see Pokemon Go moving with recent developments in the game?
I think right now where we are at this very second, a little bit of uncertainty, but I can definitely say there's some optimism if they are willing to take the same steps that they did back in October, I think it was November, and revert things and then kind of build upon that and just listen. I think we'll be a lot more optimistic and on a much better path to having a more inclusive game and probably a much more active game too. And if if we don't really hear from them and the next few weeks go by, I'd be a little bit more worried. But hopefully things will change in the next, they could come out with a press release and apology. They don't even need to apologize if it doesn't matter as much, but just reverting it right in the next 24 hours. And I'll feel pretty much better about all right, I'm going to buy your next community box, but right now it's I don't feel incentivized to spend my real money on this game. I'll pick it up. I'll keep playing it. I like collecting into Pokemon Home and transferring those to Sword and Shield and hopefully BDSP in the future. But for now, I don't really feel incentivized to hit the Apple Pay button on my phone and authenticate that transaction right now.
That rolls right into a point brought up by someone in chat that businesses need to realize the disabled community is a market, right? And it's ready to spend their money. And it's the largest minority of all, according to what this person's saying. So it's really just a bunch of money just sitting there, just waiting
on the table.
It's on the table. What are we doing?
We are loyal customers. Yep.
Do you have people
Apple
that
can tell you their receipts?
It's crazy. It's there's money to be made here. You just gotta. Someone brought up the point earlier. Someone brought up Stretch Money's album. It takes money to make money. You do have to put a little bit into it to get more out of it. It's basically how most things in life work, unless you get really lucky with how things turn out. One final question from the community I would like to bring up here as we start to wrap up. This person's asking, do you believe that the content creators that exploit the accessibility argument for their own selfish reasons instead of using the argument to help better the community are the reason Niantic doesn't take the community seriously?
Personally, I mean, I'm not as involved, you could say, with the Pokemon Go community as a whole. I definitely, I'm a lurker. I listen. I'll pop up a video if I do want to know what's going on. I certainly have your videos on my feed on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter to kind of know what's going on, which is great, and always feel pretty filled in on that. In terms of that, I mean, I think it's great because it's spreading awareness about, accessibility overall as a topic it doesn't feel like it's taken as seriously by everyone unless you need it, right? Or unless you're directly impacted by it. And a lot of people are without realizing it, like dictation in your phone. A lot of people may just casually use that who are fully able-bodied. But that technology was made to help people with visual impairments type, and accessibility needs are driving innovation in tech, in gaming. And if people realize and recognize that, and that's why, Global Accessibility Awareness Day in May is a great time to kind of listen in on the community, pop in on one of these virtual workshops and just learn more. I think that's where you can really kind of know a bit more about the history of it. I mean, even multi-touch, whether it's in an iPhone or Apple's trackpad, I think it's a great example. It was developed by a disabled person. I talked about this on Twitter a few months back. A person in Delaware who created the technology to make his inputs for his mouse more accessible. Apple took notice of that, thought, hey, that could be accessible and beneficial for a mobile device so that like disabled people can interact and have more different kinds of inputs without a keyboard. And then it was implemented into the iPhone. I think Apple patented it, or at least bought the patents for it. Eventually it did come to Android, right? Like you didn't have resistive touchscreen phones anymore around, I want to say like the 2009, 2010 era. There was all glass capacitive touchscreens, pinch to zoom everywhere. But it just benefits all of us at the end of the day. So I think ultimately, if Niantic is listening, that's the best thing, and hopefully they take action. But just spreading awareness of it amongst the community. Different people may have different attitudes about it, different tones, and you may have different perceptions about different kinds of people in the community. And that's fine. Watch who you want to watch and whatnot. I mean, I'm the same way, but I guess I don't know as much on how that conversation is going in the community as a whole. But I'm just glad that people are talking about it, and I hope that people do recognize like sort of the general root of the conversation when it comes to accessibility, and that these are people's ways of playing, like straight access to information and entertainment.
So that reminds me of that one saying where there's no such thing as bad publicity. Well, while this may not be the best case for Niantic here, it does make them look good. It still brings out awareness, not just for things maybe related to Pokemon Go, but just accessibility in general, right? There's more than one facet of life to consider accessibility. We see it every day. There's handrails and elevators. There's wheelchair ramps at maybe at your local mall, or an elevator if there isn't a ramp there to help people get to where they need to go. But yeah, there's a lot to consider with accessibility within the game. A lot of people again are on about the Incense, and rightfully so. There's definitely nothing wrong with that, and I feel that, and I'm with them on that. There's just a lot to go with,
I think one last, like you brought up a really good point there. When you just think about the things in our infrastructure that are accessibility related, just even think about a curb. A curb was kind of regulated and implemented for the ADA here in America to be the law, to have a curb at, in sidewalks and to the street. And that's to help wheelchairs. And it also helps blind people know, especially if you're wondering where those tactile dots that you may feel in your feet at curbs, where that originated from. It's from Japan. It's, an engineer did that because he had a blind friend in his village, and spread worldwide from the 60s to where right outside in my neighborhood, my residential neighborhood, we have those here. And I can feel with my white cane when I'm like safely at a curb. But even just a curb in general, person in a wheelchair advocated for that group really. And anyone who needs wheels to go up onto a sidewalk will benefit from it. A stroller, it's safe for parents with their children in a stroller, safe for if you have like a dolly and you're trying to move a giant package or a shipment and you need to roll it up onto a street. Like ramps are just, it benefits everyone. And I think at the end of the day, people who argue against accessibility, it baffles me. It actually like makes me kind of question, like, have you really thought this whole thing through, this whole ideology of like accessibility? Because it's overall just, it innovates and it moves and progresses forward, and we all benefit from it.
Good point. Moving into my promise last question. There's one point of view I've been hearing regarding Pokemon Go with changes made to the game, like relate to Incense, is that it's, and this is the point, this is not my point of view, but this is the point I've heard echo, is that it's a walking game. It's a physical exercise game to get out and go outside and play, and it's even reflected in Niantic's pillars. Exploration and exercise are 2 out of 3 of them. So what would you say, and also with this, if you want to leave some final thoughts with our conversation today and answering this question as well, how would you respond to that it's meant for you to get outside and go, and if you can't get outside and go, then go find another game to play?
Well, then how come they adapted the game during a pandemic? Why would they adapt a game to not be a walking game as much? I mean, it still is to some extent, and there's benefits to obviously moving outside your radius and your GPS coordinates, but why would they make the game then suddenly accessible just because there's a pandemic or the one time in Japan that, you know, there was bad weather, or like a natural disaster? But, you know, it makes me wonder, I'm like, they can do it. So why value those customers over anyone else? And especially, I think it's at that point, then you're really kind of going into a pretty deep conversation where it's ethics and values. And I find, as a visually impaired Pokemon Go player, it's a great motivator for me to get out. But there are times when visually it's probably not safe for me to be out. You know, being on the East Coast, we get flurries, we get snow occasionally. I could slip on ice. I mean, I have a rolling tip on my white cane. My cane isn't for stability; it's for feeling texture and terrain. But I might want to play Pokemon Go with, you know, with my walk, but suddenly I can't because I have to like pay more attention to Pokemon Go, just because I go for a walk, and then that doesn't put me in the safest situation. I think it's just I don't know if I have a straight solid answer for that, but I think it's just an ethics thing at that point. They can do it. They've done it. Why not continue it? You know, they learned the benefits of it. I'm sure I mean, I could probably look back at their profits number. I think I've heard some reports that, like, Pokemon Go has been the most profitable during the pandemic than since launch, or at least since the year following. And I think if they continue the decisions that they just did and they don't revert anything, you may not see those same profit margins in the following reports. And I think it'll be pretty telling, but I think it's a pretty silly argument. And you know, at the same time, you never know what can happen, right? Like, anyone is prone. As someone mentioned in the chat, and I've said it before, we're the largest minority group in the world. You can intersect with any other minority group, and you know, between race, nationality, disability is the largest, and we're the most, like, inclusive, I guess you could say, for that reason. But anyone can join at any time. I don't want you know, I want everyone well, you know, good health and well being, but disability is a natural part of life. I was born with underdeveloped retinas, and that's just my life. That's how I move on. And I've said it in my videos, but I think it's the best time to be blind. I have the access to technology and assistive technology, and infrastructure is all, like, there. And having, like, Uber and Lyft in my, like, hometown, if I go back to visit, or any city, even in the Midwest these days, it seems like, sure, not everywhere, but I can get around independently. So it just feels silly. And disability, you know, you get into a whole other pretty, I think, disgusting conversation about eugenics if you're talking about, like, getting into, oh, we should prioritize cures over accessibility, when that's not really, you know, money gets put into cures and treatment and all that, and it goes nowhere. We've seen it for decades. I think it's the best thing to prioritize accessibility, infrastructure, and better quality of life overall for anyone who may develop a disability later in life, or, you know, have someone who's born with it. So I think it's, yeah, over. I probably went a little deeper into, like, that answer.
It's totally fine.
Kept it kind of vague, but at the same time, I think it's more of an ethics thing. And yeah, I hope that ethically Niantic values accessibility, because there's so many benefits to it, and we all benefit from it. And for the few players who, you know, that perspective, who feel like it's just a walking game, sure, it can be a walking game, but watch your community. You know, I guarantee you, Pokemon Community Go Fest is going to be smaller in numbers, or at least in ticket sales, and you know, raids will probably not have as many people. Like, you're just going to see players not play anymore, who need it, or people who were able-bodied one day, and, you know, life happens, anything can happen, and they just have to stop playing because not there for them anymore.
Ultimately, that could be the result if we don't see any changes being made soon. And here's hoping. player since day one. Here's hoping that they really do. I mean, not that I would consider my investment in the game thus far a waste, but I would hate to see something that's been a rather integral part of my life personally, just kind of fall by the wayside and just be that game that you used to play or that game that you sometimes open and sometimes check to see if anything interesting is going on, and you just move on to something bigger and better. Maybe the problem is right now, maybe there just isn't competition for Pokemon Go. Something else that, not that it would be using the same IP, but something else that would garner more attention than that particular game. I don't know. It's hard to say. But James, thank you so much for your time and having this discussion about accessibility, the state of accessibility in Pokemon Go. They've done a lot, but there's obviously a lot of work that needs to be done in that way. You said it earlier, the game is technically, well, not accessible. What really aids is that the operating system, the hardware surrounding the game, whatever what the game is encapsulated in, and the game itself needs to be addressed more so. You said earlier with advancements in iOS and Android, or even maybe for folks who can't upgrade right now, their phone might be locked at a certain version because the developers decided to not support that OS, or that phone cannot support any further updates to the OS and has to be locked right there until that one fateful day when Pokemon Go announced anyone on these devices or this version number and below, we can't help you anymore, and they move on, and that happens. It's not often that we get those tweets, but I see those, and a lot of people message and say, hey, but I won't be able to play Pokemon Go anymore, and different things like that, and that's obviously for a variety of reasons. It's hard to say exactly what it is to those people where why they can't play the game anymore, but a lot needs to be done with the game itself, no matter what platform it is on, and Niantic has a long way to go. But James, thank you so much for lending your voice and your insight and your expertise on accessibility in general and how it relates to Pokemon Go. It's a much needed conversation. It needs to happen a little more often. I'm not aware of anyone else maybe having these conversations. Everyone has an opinion on accessibility in the game, but it's good to hear from someone who one has to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, and two, who has actually worked with other companies in gaming and tech on how they approach accessibility. So thank you very much for what you do. I really do appreciate that.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for sharing your platform and for just bringing more awareness, hopefully, to players who may not be as involved or be looking this stuff up. And